Welcome to another book review. My name is Jason, and the book that I'm going to be reviewing today is, let's put it on that side. There we go. The Island of the Day Before by Umberto Eco. What can I say first off? So Umberto Eco is actually an Italian author. He has written several books. I have all but one, I think. This actually was the first one of his that I bought, but it's currently the third one of his that I've read. I read Baudolino and The Name of the Rose first. Got into this one. I have several books that have been written by non-native English speakers, and it's always interesting to me. So this was translated from Italian by William Weaver, and he did a great job. On it. It's always interesting to me to see how well and what kind of stamp the translator puts on the prose on the book itself. Obviously, there's going to be some need for translating not just the words themselves, but the ideas behind them, because we have idioms and things that we use that don't translate directly into another language. Like, for instance, when we congratulate, when we go to wish an actor good luck, that's bad. You don't do that. You tell the actor to break a leg. And so there's things like that if I were to write something and I say, hey, break a leg, if that were to be translated, that might seem kind of harsh to someone from another language. They would look at that and say, why is he wishing this person would break his leg? I thought they were friends or something. I thought, And so at that point, the translator has to come in and say, well, they in English say break a leg. We say in bocca al lupo, for instance. That's the Italian way of wishing someone luck. It's in the mouth of the wolf, which doesn't make any sense in English. Why are you wishing me to be in the mouth of the wolf? That's actually a phrase. You say in bocca al lupo, and they say crepi al lupo. It basically means we hope he doesn't bite. So we have The Island of the Day Before. It's about Roberto della Griva. He's an Italian nobleman. He's from La Griva. He grew up there and everything, and then he left and he went on his adventures. Now, the opening of the book is rather interesting. So it's called The Island of the Day Before, and the book opens with Roberto being shipwrecked, and instead of being shipwrecked and landing on an island, he lands on another ship. Kind of weird. He gets so the ship he's on was a Dutch ship called the Amaryllis, and it starts going down. So a sailor ties him to a plank to help him out, and that ends up making him so that he floats and things. And the next day, not the next day, when he next comes to his senses, he's actually bumping up against another boat. And he's thinking, well, is this the same boat that I just got, washed overboard from? Turns out it's actually another Dutch boat called the Daphne. And he's up on this boat. He can't swim. That's one of the reasons why he's tied to the plank. And so he can see on one side there's an island, and you can see on the other side that there appears to be another island or something bigger, but there's land masses to either side of him, one bigger than the other, and he's in this calm little inlet between them. So anyway, he starts exploring this ship, and Umberto Eco, he goes back and forth, and it can seem somewhat disjointed, but the narrative actually makes it flow fairly well. So it talks about Roberto being shipwrecked on this ship, the Daphne, and then it jumps way back in time to when he's born and growing up in Lagriva, and the influences that shaped him there. And then it jumps back to the Daphne and the things that he discovers on the Daphne, and then it jumps again back to his home in Lagriva, and him going from Lagriva to Casale with his father to fight in the siege of Casale, which, if I remember right, was part of the 30 Years' War. Anyway, so it's very interesting in the way that it moves back and forth between the present for Roberto and his past, and it goes through this basically every other chapter. It switches between the past and the present, and that's kind of why it's called The Island of the Day Before, because it definitely deals with this concept of time and how things move from past to the present. Not that Roberto really grasps the truth of that. Anyway, like I said, very good book. Very good book. I highly recommend reading it. However, that being said, there are a number of places where it goes from talking about what Roberto is doing and learning and how he is coping, what he's discovered, that kind of thing, to where he's talking philosophy with various people. And because he's talking philosophy, it gets pretty deep sometimes. And the discussion can get kind of bogged down. There were a couple of places where I found myself reading it, and then having to reread the paragraph because my mind just kind of went and clicked off, and then I read the paragraph and I'm like, wait, what did I just read? And I had to go back and reread it. It also deals a little bit with alchemy, and there's a little bit of a need for suspension of disbelief at that point. So anyway, Roberto, he ends up in the 30 Years' War, and then his father ends up dying there, and he gives the title to Lagriva to a relative, cousin, and he ends up going to Paris. He just wasn't really happy at Lagriva after his father and his mother died. And he ends up in Paris, where he is even further educated by the various thinkers of the time, the various thoughts of the time. Kind of interesting, there's very heavy Catholic influence, but that may not be from the author, more of the author bringing in the philosophies of the time. As I said, he was an Italian nobleman, so when he was growing up, he was educated by basically a monk, a Carmelite monk, in fact. And then he later, when he ended up in Casale at the siege, he was further educated by a French nobleman and also another Catholic priest. And it kind of shows how their ideas differed between the ideas of the Frenchman, who kind of was an atheist, and the Catholic priest, who was definitely he definitely believed in God and everything that kind of goes along with that. So I'm trying to think about how much I should tell you, because I can tell you quite a bit and still not talk too much about the ending of the story, and I can tell you things that may spoil bits of the story for you. So there's things in there like, how did Roberto end up on a Dutch ship, the Amaryllis, and it sinking? I think what I should do is say that he was kind of a subject matter expert, they believed. And that's one of the reasons why he ended up on the boat. It's kind of interesting, the alchemical things that they go into. They talk about this thing called the powder of sympathy. Now, the powder of sympathy was something that they were able to use to help heal wounds. And they did it not by treating the wound, although you could do that. It was more effective to not treat the wound with this powder, but to treat the cause of the wound. So what caused the wound? Well, this guy just got stabbed by a sword, so instead of sprinkling this powder on the sword wound, you sprinkle it on the sword, and somehow that takes the pain away and makes it so that the wound heals faster. So Roberto has this great idea to compare the powder of sympathy to love, and how love makes us act, and it's something like the powder of sympathy, in that I feel love towards someone else, and if that person doesn't reciprocate, that can cause the wound. But if that person does reciprocate that love, then that wound is it's really interesting. So he delves into the powder of sympathy and how it acts and what it does, and that's how he is able to discourse on the similarities between the two. And that catches the attention of the power brokers of the time, who then press him into service to go on this ship. It's kind of interesting. I keep saying that it's kind of interesting. What I should say instead is that at the time, the problem for sailing had to do with longitude, apparently. Latitude, they could figure out latitude, but it was the longitude that they were having difficulties with, because with latitude they could take measurements from the angles of the sun and things, and they could extrapolate to within a fair degree of accuracy what latitude they were at. But what ended up happening was the longitude threw people off, because the longitude, when they started sailing, if they had a clock, they could time how long they were sailing, and if they sailed at a certain rate for a certain distance, they passed 1 degree of longitude. But the problem is that any clock was subject to the waves and things, and over time it got less and less accurate, and there was no way to recalibrate the clock. And so you could sail out and think, I'm at this particular latitude when I come to this island, and then sail back and say, oh, I found this great place, it's at these coordinates, and the next time you go there, it's not there. And the problem is that the latitude, you're pretty sure you're on the right latitude, it's the longitude that's the problem. And so they couldn't find, there was these islands, the Islands of Solomon they called them, because they were much like Solomon's mines, they were full of riches. And they were discovered by a Spanish explorer, and then when they tried to go back to those islands, they were gone. Not really gone, but they found out that their measurements of where they were wasn't accurate, and so they couldn't find them again. Everybody figured that they were on the 180th meridian because religious reasons. It was kind of interesting. It was like, on one side was the holy city Jerusalem, and then on the other side was these holy islands of Solomon that were part of, like God's gift to man kind of thing. Anyway, the the French found out the English were going to be trying an experiment to figure out this problem of longitude, and so they were going to be using this powder of sympathy somehow. And so what they wanted to do was send Roberto, who knew about the powder of sympathy, and could discourse on it, so they figured he knew his stuff. So they'd send him on this ship to try to figure out what the English were doing with this powder of sympathy and how they were using it. So he was to be a French spy. So anyway, back on the Daphne, he actually runs into Father Casper. He actually had somebody that was there with him the whole time, who was at first hiding from him because he didn't know what to expect. And so he was moving things around, and Roberto thought that he was going crazy, or that he had a stowaway in his fictitious half-brother. So when he was younger, he made up this half-brother. He was the illegitimate son of his father. He was older, but since Roberto was the legitimate heir, he was jealous of Roberto, and he wanted to do everything he could to make Roberto's life miserable. So if Roberto did something bad, in his mind it was Ferrante that did it, not him. And so as he got older, he realized this was a delusion, but then again, it crops up again and again as he's going along, because he figures that there's somebody out to get him, and it must be Ferrante. And so this comes back again and again. There are a number of things about the book that, it makes sense, but you have to make sure that you're thinking of the 17th century mindset rather than art now modern mindset, because he has discussions with Father Casper on board the Daphne, and some of the things they talk about are things that we kind of take for granted, like the Earth not being the center of the universe. I know, it's me. No, I'm just kidding. We all kind of think that in our own minds, in our own ways, that we're the center of the universe, but in reality, this was the time of Galileo, when he was under house arrest, and he was made to recant his theory that the Earth didn't, or I should say, the sun didn't revolve around the Earth, that the Earth actually revolved around the sun itself. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, yeah. And then, of course, my thinking also goes to, why is it a big deal? I don't understand why God suddenly ceases to be God if the Earth is not the center of the universe. And things like, they talk about Roberto believing that there are multiple worlds, infinite worlds out there that God has created, and Father Casper telling him that this kind of thinking is wrong and heretical, because what are we to believe, that Christ came to Earth, atoned for our sins, and then went to another planet and did the same thing there? He's like, that's ridiculous. And I'm sitting there, and so he's basically saying there's only one planet where there's anybody that lives, and that's here on Earth. And I'm sitting there going, so you're attempting to limit God by telling me that God, who is omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing, all that stuff that's God, and you're trying to tell me that he has limits, that there is something that I'm sitting there going, why is this a big deal? Why can't God have created more worlds? Why? I just don't get it. Anyway, so there's these ideas that, like I said, in my mind, I sit there and I go, yeah, that shouldn't matter. It doesn't matter. But at that time, it was like, Father Casper was about ready to let Roberto drown at one point because of their differences in philosophy. And he was like, "Oh, it's better if you drown right now than, you go to hell for what you're thinking." And I'm going, well, you're ready to basically murder Roberto rather than trying to teach him and bring him around to your way of thinking. So anyway, like I said, very good. The ending, I just did not see what the ending was going to be at any point during this book. So it kept me interested the whole time to try to figure out where is this going? What's going to happen next? What is it that Roberto is after? What is going to happen with him and Father Casper? It was like I said, it's a good book. There's a couple places where it gets kind of bogged down with the depth of the philosophical ideas that they're going into, but still, very, very good book. So, highly recommend it, and I'm signing off for now. So, if you like this, like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments if you've read this, if you have questions about it that I can answer for you. I'd be glad to talk about them some more. If you have books that you want my opinions on, or if I want to see if I've read it, or if I'm going to read it, let me know.